Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is December 20th, 2022. And tonight I'm going to be talking about wilderness therapy in the media. This is a special broadcast, not one that we've ever done before. But we felt like with some of the recent articles that have come out that we needed to have some kind of response to be able to share with people, also to share internally with people, because some of the reports that have come out in the news have been quite disturbing, and everybody deserves an intelligent answer. Like I've said, I always think one of my mantras is that as a therapy client, you have the right to ask difficult questions, and you deserve from those difficult questions intelligent answers. So I'll do my best to provide that for you this evening. So thank you for joining me. First of all, I want to talk about this idea that we believe that everybody has a right to tell their story. We in fact, that's a part of our mantra, our philosophy at Evoke. One of the things that we emphasize so much at Evoke. In fact, my daughter wrote a post about this sometime last year where she said that the greatest gift that a parent can give to a child is a willingness to be cast as a villain in the child's story. And really what she's talking about, this idea that to be an adult, to be a parent, in this case, to be a wilderness therapy program, means that we have an obligation to listen to not just the praise and the congratulations and the gratitude that come from our many clients and participants, but also to listen to where we might have fallen short, where we've been hurt. When I've had the opportunity to respond to people who have reached out to me on a one-on-one personal level, I've taken that opportunity. And by and large, when I've listened to them, it's been a healing process for them. So this is an attempt to maybe provide those of you who are sitting on the sidelines, those of you who are observing this, those of you who might have heard some of these stories. This is an opportunity for us to give our best response that we can to them. So I'll start off with this. While research and anecdotal experiences show that the vast majority of wilderness therapy participants experience healing and transformation, there are some who report otherwise, of course. I always get asked this question. In fact, I was one of the people that responded to the USA Today article that came out recently. The reporter called and contacted us, and I was the person from Evoke who was able to respond to them. And I shared with her that, like I just said on the previous slide, that there are an overwhelming percentage of our participants who will talk about it being a positive and healing experience. And one of the questions I get asked is, why aren't those voices heard? Why don't they take the stage with the people that have been hurt and experience more pain from this experience? And here are a few of my thoughts. First of all, a lot of people that experience healing and therapy don't want to be advocates. I remember many years ago when I was co-presenting at a conference on transgender LGBTQ issues, and one of the things that my co-presenter brought out was that a lot of transgender folks don't want to be advocates. They just want to live a quiet life, healing their own wounds, focusing on their own growth in their own life. And so, for a lot of families, this is a very private matter, a very vulnerable time in their life. And they don't necessarily want to be out in front and have all of their family issues and their pain, their trauma, their history. They don't want that under the microscope. And so, while they might have very positive experiences to share, the spotlight isn't for them. Positive voices are even sometimes we've received a lot of feedback from our clients that when they do speak out positively about their experience, particularly in wilderness therapy, that at times they're bullied by other people that have a lot of anger and frustration and hurt. We at Evoke have received many threats and very harsh letters. We've had our staff, myself, threatened, our families threatened with violence, murder, and sexual assault. So there are obviously some energy out there, and the vast majority of these people responding haven't even been through the Evoke process. They may have been through another process. So that's another reason why people would be inclined to keep their voice on the sidelines, to not speak out about it because they expose themselves to an element. And when we all know today that there's a lot of positive things that go on in the media, there's a lot of positive things that go on in social media, but we also know that it gives people a platform for bullying. And so unfortunately, that's another reason why people might want to speak out. Another reason why these voices aren't heard, and I shared some of this with the USA Today reporter, is that the simple and subtle healing process doesn't make for interesting news. It's quiet. It's slow. It's nearly invisible at times to the observer. And oftentimes when I'm being interviewed by people in the media, even people that are writing a pro wilderness therapy article, who know of the transformative power of wilderness therapy. Even those folks want to hear the exceptions. They want to hear the stuff that's salacious, the stuff that's really compelling and interesting. It's similar to the way that you drive on the freeway and you see a car accident and all of the lanes slow down, because there's something about us. I think that we love the feeling of being alive when we have that experience of seeing something more dramatic or even more traumatic. It gives us a sense or a rush or some energy. So anywhere from the subtleness of the healing process to not wanting to being in the spotlight to, again, it doesn't make in many cases for very interesting news. Oftentimes news sources want to provide the most exciting, exceptional stories to draw in the most the most viewership or the most readers. So I want to talk about and I want to respond for the next several slides on the folks that are complaining and reaching out and telling their story and their experience of having had a painful experience in this process. Where are these folks coming from emotionally? First of all, I think the thing that they're feeling is a feeling of powerlessness. They want other people to feel the way that they feel. And I think in some cases, it might not even be that the specifics of their story, just like a lot of our children, that the specifics of their story are always accurate, but the feeling can be accurate. They were made to feel powerless and small. It's why when I train our therapists and when I go around the country and the world training therapists at other programs, that the compassionate, empathic, non-judgmental response in therapy is really the not just the precursor to treatment, but it really is the treatment. We run an experiential program, meaning that we use wilderness hiking, camping, small group living. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. We use that as a way to evoke and bring up issues, to draw them out. We know that experiential therapy gets access to the parts of our brain where trauma historically is stored. Even pre-verbal trauma is stored. And by people participating in an experiential program like Evoke, that stuff can come to the surface. Whereas self-report, you might not get to it. It's not so much that they're hiding it; it's that it's unconscious or pre-verbal. So, having said that, part of this process that I want to recognize is that above and beyond all of the experiential activities in wilderness therapy, any therapeutic experience is experiential. If you walk into an office with no windows, sitting across from one person, the therapist, with with artificial lighting, you're still taking a risk. You're showing up and hoping that what has happened to you before won't happen to you in that session. That instead of being met with judgment, with impatience and intolerance, criticism, feedback, advice, you get met with empathy. A core ethic at Evoke, a core ethic in all of the writing that I do as the executive clinical director, is that it's only in the presence of an empathic other that we can experience a transformative experience in therapy. It is that experience that draws us out, that allows us to tell more and more of our story. So, above and beyond the specific complaints that people might have, we always have to look at ourselves and say, are we showing up in this way that makes it safe for them? Not just physically, but also emotionally. Sometimes folks that struggle with boundaries, this even happens in my family at a lower temperature, at a lower level. Sometimes people's responses to boundaries can be rage. We know that from developmental psychology. That children, small children, when in certain personalities, certain temperaments, respond to boundaries with anger and rage. And so sometimes it's about the boundary. It's about saying no. It's about saying you're going to have to deal with this. If it's not here, you're going to have to deal with it somewhere else. There's a precedent I wrote that when certain personalities experience limits and boundaries, they respond with rage. I think fundamentally, and every parent listening to this can relate to this, I'm sure. Fundamentally, the folks that are the sources in these kinds of articles, the common thread for them is that they don't feel heard. The experience that they're having tends to lead to exaggerations and distortions in an effort to be heard. I've done that myself. I've shared many, many times that if I were to come home from work and say to my wife that my boss was not listening to me or took credit for an idea that I had, that it would be very common and easy for the average spouse or family member to say, well, maybe they just didn't understand, or maybe they didn't know, or maybe they had the idea first. So instead of saying that, what I'm inclined to do, what our children are inclined to do, is to say, my boss never listens to me. My boss is always trying to take credit, right? My father's always yelling. My mother's always preoccupied or anxious or what have you. The exaggeration comes from a place of not feeling heard. And so we use the language, the examples, to amplify our voices in the hope, the desperate hope that somebody will hear us. So part of what we're saying tonight at Evoke is we hear you. We will, in the immediate, continue to look at our practices. I will continue to teach on all of these broadcasts, best practices in psychotherapy. And where we make mistakes, we will do our best to be accountable and to apologize that. Like I've said, the people that have reached out to me personally, when I've done that, by and large, almost all of them have felt connected, have felt resolved in some way. In fact, some of them subsequently have become clients on an outpatient basis. We know that there's a difficult mixture when it comes to mental health and social media. And that sometimes, again, because this desire to feel heard and to feel empowered, that people will take to social media. I talk about this all the time when not talking about wilderness therapy and people that have been through the program. I talk about this idea that people are using social media in many ways for their therapy. But social media, as you know, can be a very unsafe place to express your thoughts and your feelings. So that mix becomes difficult. Sometimes the clients that we serve have a history and a proclivity towards suicidal ideation and behaviors, towards self-harm, and toward aggressive responses to authority figures. So some of that is about sample, right? It's about where they're coming from. This is the way that folks, I'm not talking about complaining. I'm not talking about reaching out to us. I'm not talking about even reporting us or any therapy program to the licensing board under which they operate. But I'm talking about sometimes that's the way that people cope. And again, one of the things I try to attempt to communicate during all of these broadcasts is that we can all relate to that. If you're having a particularly bad day, if your feelings are a little bit raw, it doesn't take much for somebody in the car next to you sometimes to do something, to not pay attention when they're changing lanes, for you to have this angry, aggressive reaction. So we can all relate to that. And the folks that are reaching out and telling their story deserve our compassion. They deserve our patience. Most importantly, one of the things I want to emphasize tonight, and it's going to be, I'm going to quote the response that we gave to the USA Today article a little bit more precisely, but I'll just say it here. More often than not, there's not been a report to licensing bodies or law enforcement, and news agencies are the quickest and easiest way for someone to tell their story and for it to be taken at face value. This is the easiest path sometimes for alumni who are wanting to be heard. And it fits well for the news agencies' agenda because they want to make for something rich and powerful and exciting, something that has a lot of intense emotion. And we human beings, like I said, we're drawn to that. You ever wonder why you're interested in looking at the proverbial train wreck? Is because it gives you a sense of being alive. So in essence, here is our response to those folks that are sharing their stories. We hear you. Absolutely. And in fact, I think in a large way, I was sent to treatment when I was a teenager. And part of the way that I see my role in this is to amplify the voices of teenagers and adolescents and young adults who have been hurt by society, by teachers, and by their parents. And even in the case, if it happens from us, with us. We honor your feelings and your experience. We'll continue to reevaluate our practices, philosophy, and protocols to try to ensure that all participants have a positive experience in the care of our program. And as I stated in the article, as we stated in the article, this is really important to me, really important to us. Evoke is committed to the emotional and physical safety of their participants. We do not believe that healing can happen in an unsafe atmosphere. Anybody with complaints of abuse or mistreatment should report their concerns to the state licensing board that oversees those programs. I'm going to share that link visually with those that are watching live in just a moment. We support healing and growth, and that can only happen in the context of emotional safety. Anybody who experiences abuse from any program should have their voice heard. Any program that practices punitive, shameful, controlling, coercive, and intimidating behavior should be reprimanded, if not shut down. That's how strongly we feel about it. And I feel that way about Evoke. And while we can't comment on specific participant experiences, we can respond to some of the critiques and questions about wilderness therapy. So I'm going to transition a little bit. First of all, there's something that's been happening in our country in the last couple of years, and it was led by Paris Hilton, the daughter of the Hilton fortune. Paris Hilton has a story where she talks about being in a residential treatment center and experiencing some pretty horrific abuse. And she led what became an organization called Breaking Code Silence. And I'm going to talk about that. And then the reason that I'm doing this, the reason that we are doing this right now, is because of the recent USA Today article. So I went to the Breaking Code of Silence. It's called Breaking Code Silence. I keep on saying Breaking Code of Silence, but it's Breaking Code Silence. I went to their website recently, and as I was perusing and looking at the information, looking at information about us, about myself, and seeing what was accurate and what wasn't, and there was plenty of both there, I noticed this button right here. In the drop down under for parents, I noticed that there was a button that had safe TTI facilities. TTI is the language they use to talk about our field of treatment. It's called treble teen industry is what they call it. So I clicked on that, and I was curious who was going to get the good review from Breaking Code Silence. And here's what came up. Here's the page that came up. It had the number 404 at the top, which is an error message that shows up in a lot of browsers when there's a page that's unavailable. And so they were being kind of clever and cute with that. And the page reads like this: 404. The page you are looking for cannot be found because there are no safe troubled teen industry facilities. If you are a parent or guardian seeking support for your family and are considering a residential facility, we encourage you to reach out. We can provide you information from our extensive database to help you make an informed decision about the safety and well-being of the youth that you love. And then has the email address there. So I saw this and I was struck by this, and I was thinking to myself, according to this website, there are no programs that are safe for teens in the United States. No residential, therapeutic, inpatient programs that are safe for teens in our country. And on one level, it's ridiculous, of course. On one level, it kind of makes the everything else they're saying, it loses some credibility when they say it, when they paint everything with one brush so dramatically. But on another level, I have some empathy for that. Because like I said, I spend a lot of my career teaching therapists, not just in wilderness therapy, but in fact, I'll share with you a little bit later an article that I wrote for a journal and that got published in Psychology Today. I spend my time trying to teach therapists in outpatient settings, in intensive outpatient settings. Some of the very milieus that Breaking Code Silence encourages parents to utilize instead of places like residential treatment centers and wellness therapy programs. I spend my time and energy trying to coach and teach and help therapists respond to clients in a compassionate, non-judgmental, loving way, pointing out to them that the urgency to fix the child gets understood by the child as something is wrong with them. In fact, a huge thrust of Evoke's program, which I'll talk about a little bit more, is that part of what we try to do is turn that idea upside down and say, this is a family problem. Yes, I call it the Trojan horse therapy. Yes, we will accept the premise that your child is struggling with mental health issues or with addictions. Yes, we will keep them safe. You will have immediate relief from that concern. And immediately after that is accomplished, after the child has enrolled in the program, we spend the bulk of our energy. I spend the bulk of my time trying to invite parents into a process to look at themselves. My first book, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, the title, Heroic Parent, alludes to this idea that the parent that's a heroic parent is the parent that's willing to look at themselves, the parent that's willing to look at their part in things. My favorite book that I quote more than, or refer to perhaps more than any other book out there, I think the most important book that's ever been written about children and child development, The Drama of the Gifted Child, teaches that idea. Carl Jung, I quote all the time, says that until parents recognize that they themselves are the primary source of their children's neuroses, things will not get better. So we accept the idea of the enrollment of the child, but then we go to work immediately trying to affect the family system, offer parents support. And by the way, I want to be clear, parents of children that are struggling deserve the same kind of respect and compassion as their children. We don't like phrases at Evoke like helicopter parent and snowplow parent. We think of those as euphemisms. But really, underneath that message, there's an insult to the parent that something again is wrong with you. I had to change the slide today. I was going to share with you something that I was told that I ought not to share. And I can just say this: that clients often report contradictory information about their wellness experience. I'm going to tell you orally a story and changing some of the facts to protect confidentiality, just to make the point. I had a student many years ago who came into the program, a small little guy, sweet little kid. In fact, he looked quite young, even though I think he was 15 at the time of his enrollment. And he was anxious. He was scared. His parents were anxious. They were overwhelmed by the struggles and the challenges that they had. And the young man, through the course of his program, did remarkably well. By the end, and at the last session where the family came out and spent time for a couple of days with him, and we were going through the session, he was actually comforting his parents. On one of the phone calls that we did for family therapy, when the parents were hesitating about holding a clear boundary with him, he actually said to his parents, he said, I can handle things a lot better than what you're used to. You can just tell me the truth and I can deal with it. So he graduates from our program. He goes home. The parents gave him a chance to come home. I thought he was a mild case and that going home after wilderness would be something that would be worth the experiment. There's a huge upside to him coming home after the program. I kept in touch with the parents, and over the course of several weeks, among other things, they reported that he was breaking virtually every expectation in the contract that they had worked on together at the conclusion of our program. And as we were talking about it, and the parents were talking about executing on the consequences associated in the contract, one of them was that he went back to treatment. And so I asked them, I said, why are you holding back and not making that decision? And among other things, they said to me, well, he's reported to his home therapist, and the home therapist believes it, that he was traumatized by wilderness therapy. In fact, he's been given the diagnosis of PTSD by the therapist related to wilderness therapy. So I had compassion. I was clear from my experience with this young man's treatment that there was nothing in his experience that told me that had happened. But I honored it, and we went forward. Finally, it got to the point where things became so desperate and unsafe at home that the parents wanted to send him back, first to us, and then on to a therapeutic boarding school for longer term care. I remember the day that I was driving out to the car. It was in the winter. I drove my car up. I parked far enough so that the group couldn't see the car, because we like to keep it keep the wilderness experience somewhat pristine. So I parked my car and I started walking over to where the group was camping. And as I got within eyesight of the group, the young man that I'm describing to you ran from the group and ran over to me and jumped into my arms. He was a little guy, like I said, jumped into my arms and gave me a tight squeeze. We exchanged hellos. I told him it was good to see him. Sorry it was under these conditions. And as we sat down to have our session just a little bit later, I asked him, I said, what about this experience where you told your therapist at home that you've been traumatized? And he said, that was just the only way I felt like I could get my parents back. The only way that I could exert any power over them was to tell that story that way. So again, I don't know that that applies to every single story, but I will tell you that we listen to some of these stories, and sometimes in different places a very different story is being told by these same sources, by these same folks who claim to be participants of our program. If somebody has experienced abuse or neglect at our program or any program in Utah, particularly wilderness therapy programs, we would encourage them to go to www.dlbc.utah.gov. We are licensed under the State of Utah Department of Human Services Office of Licensing. One of the mistruths that gets told in some of these articles is that there is no oversight. And I can speak for our program and the other programs in Utah that there is a significant amount of oversight. Not just from our licensing body, but we're also accredited through the independent organization of AEE. And we have site checks from both our licensing board and also from our accrediting bodies. So if you have a complaint, the best way, first of all, let me say it to you this way. I would encourage you first to come to us. I'm happy to personally take time and talk to anybody who's had an experience in our program. You can just email webinar@evoketherapy.com. I might not be able to get to you the first day, but I'll do my best to get to everybody and listen and hear you out. If you don't trust that process, if coming to us feels like it's not going to get you what you need, then I, by all means, implore you to go to the licensing body. Because like I said earlier, like we said earlier, these programs deserve to be, if they are, in fact, doing the things that they are sometimes accused of, they deserve to be reprimanded, if not more. Another thing that gets talked about in wilderness therapy is that it's not evidence-based. I have a couple of links, again, here for you, those of you watching. You can go to the obhcouncil.org/research page to learn about research the ongoing research that has been done and is ongoing today for all wilderness therapy programs that are part of that organization. You're also welcome to go to evoketherapy.com's research page, the proven results page under the About tab. One of the critiques about the research that gets done in wilderness therapy is that it's done by the programs themselves or by the body of accreditation of these programs. But something you also should hear is that the results are often published in peer-reviewed journals that are outside organizations and sources that demand a certain level of credibility in terms of their reporting and their technique. Wilderness therapy is a delivery method. This is important to understand. Just like outpatient therapy is a delivery method, or intensive outpatient or residential therapy is a delivery method. That's the venue, that's the milieu. But the therapy is rooted in theories, in therapy theories. I think that's one of the most misunderstood things about wilderness therapy is the fact that we utilize evidence-based approaches. At Evoke specifically, we rely heavily on attachment theory. Attachment theory says that the child is shaped in large part, their mental health in large part is a function of the secure or the insecure attachment of the parent. Again, looking toward the parent and their impact on the child. And when I talk to parents in these broadcasts, one of the things I'm always saying is, yes, you dented your children. Absolutely. Every parent dents their children. Your children are no exception to that. And we're not going to lay a bunch of guilt and shame on you. We're going to ask you and invite you into a conversation to look at yourself. I know it's a cliche, but the child doesn't need you not to fall down. They just need you to get back up and say you're sorry and do your best. It's the same task for a parent as it is for a psychotherapist, as it is for a school teacher. One of my favorite moments of all time is when my daughter, I got a call from her school teacher complaining about some of her behavior. And in the course of the meeting with my daughter, my wife, myself, and the teacher took accountability for some of her shaming behaviors. And I profusely thanked her for that gift. Thank you for being able to model for my daughter, I said, what it looks like when you make a mistake. And the teacher said to me, well, I was afraid some parents would use that against me, and it's happened before, and I was afraid you might use it against me. And I said, in our house, that's not the way that it goes. In our house, we recognize that everybody, every child, every adult makes mistakes. And if the child needs the parent to be perfect, they're doomed. But what they need is they need the parent to be able to say, I'm sorry. One of my favorite things is to watch a staff or a therapist at Evoke apologize to a student. I remember I was sitting in on a weekly group where the outgoing staff and the incoming staff were overlapping, and the therapist was there processing the group. And one of the students said to one of the outgoing staff, said, "You were rude to me, you were sarcastic and disrespectful." And I remember just waiting to see how the staff would respond. Just to note, the therapist was there. There were 7 or 8 other staff sitting there. All of the group was sitting there. All of the clients, the 9 or so clients were sitting in the group. I was there. The executive clinical director and co-founder of the program was there. So there was a lot of pressure on the staff. And you would think that he would be more likely to defend himself. But he said to the student, he said, "You're right. I was impatient. I did snap at you. I did use my power inappropriately, and I'm sorry." And you could just see the child's shoulders relax. I pulled that staff away afterwards and I said, that's what makes the difference right there. I remember years ago we had Harriet Lerner come to one of our conferences to speak on her newest book, Why Won't You Apologize? And one of the things I asked her to talk about was the role of therapists apologizing to clients. Folks, we have to. We have to. Because therapists are human. They're going to be impatient. They're going to make mistakes. Staff are going to do the same thing. And in that context, what I'm describing, that page from Breaking Code Silence, where it says there are no safe programs, if that is the measure, they're right. There are no safe programs. But the way you counteract that idea is you show up and you're human. One of my favorite things that I've written about boundaries, I go through the steps of boundaries. But at the end of the explanation of boundaries, I explain to parents, at the end of the day, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to fall short. But then comes the opportunity to provide the child something more important than anything else, and that is show them what it's like to be human. Apologize, acknowledge it. I think at Evoke and in our field, we could do a lot better at apologizing. I remember when the USA Today interviewer was interviewing me, she said, I want to hear both sides of the story. And I said, there's no both sides. We're on their side. If we've made mistakes that are overt or subtle, big or small, if they're willing to talk to us, we're willing to listen. We base our theory on attachment theory, motivational interviewing. Motivational interviewing encourages non-confrontation, tries to diminish the power dynamic in the therapeutic alliance, and has a tremendous amount of research. Family systems theory, I'll talk a lot about that in just a moment. Play therapy. What we borrow from play therapy is that children don't do talk therapy the way that adults do talk therapy. One of the greatest adages in therapy that I borrowed from in our work at Evoke is that we use play, or in our case, wilderness therapy experience, because play is the language of children. So yes, we have therapy sessions. Yes, we listen to self-report. Yes, we have books and workbooks and various assignments that the folks are working on depending upon their issues. But we also look at how they're interacting, how they're coping. I myself have been out there when it's been cold or rainy. You can't take anything for granted. You have to work just to stay comfortable out there. That's what wilderness therapy teaches you. When I visited my own son, because my son went through wilderness therapy when he was a young teenager. In fact, when I told him I was doing this broadcast tonight, he said to me, if I could, I would tell folks how many people have reached out to me over the course of my life telling me that wilderness therapy has made a difference for them. I've been out there visiting him and been frustrated at times that the wind and the weather, when I visited him, the wind and the weather was in the way. I remember when I was talking to a staff member named Steve many, many years ago, and it was October and it was raining and it was cold, and we were doing sessions in our sleeping bags and we couldn't quite get the fire to warm us up because the wood was wet and we had a shelter and the smoke was getting in our eyes. It was miserable. And after my first session, I said to Steve, I said, I'm going to give you 5 minutes to talk me out of having the rest of the sessions in my car. And Steve didn't need 5 minutes. He needed one sentence. He said, Brad, the only thing I'll say to you is show them how to struggle. And immediately it shifted my whole paradigm. I thought, this is hard. This is uncomfortable. But I'm going to sit in it with them. And I'm going to be uncomfortable. And I'm going to model for them my human, fallible, impatient self. We also borrow a lot from the growth mindset. Carol Dweck, the folks out of Berkeley, who talk about that it is challenge that helps people to grow. It is stretching that helps people to grow. It's not, in fact, what the growth mindset tells us is that if you tell a child that they're gifted, that they're more likely to cheat and to quit early when the challenge gets too great. But if you praise children's effort, they're more likely to try a difficult task for a longer period of time. So we know that challenge, in our field sometimes it's called challenge by invitation, that challenge helps people to develop a greater sense of self, a greater sense of self-efficacy. The research in wilderness therapy has shown that children's external locus of control, that is, what happens to me determines my happiness, becomes much more internalized. That is, how I deal with it will determine my happiness and my meaning. Sometimes the complaint that we get, that I've received from folks who've been through wilderness therapy, is the focus on the child as the problem. And this is something that I'm incredibly happy to respond to, incredibly confident to respond to. There is a suggestion that because of the issues that we treat in children, that these issues should be worked out at home or with the use of outpatient therapy. There is no empirical basis for this assertion, and according to family system theory, of which I have a PhD, sometimes temporary separation provides family members an opportunity to focus on their work prior to working with the entire system. In fact, one of the persons who is credited with founding of family therapy, Dr. Murray Bowen, never treated two people in the same family at the same time. He saw them in the context, he conceptualized them in the context of a family system. But it's just like couples therapy. Sometimes couples therapy, if the couple is raw, you don't want to see them together. You want to see them individually. Sometimes when people are heated, when they're having reactiveness with each other, you want to pull them aside. So wilderness therapy, I talk about this idea that it's a temporary separation, creating a base or a foundation. Not unlike this example, if you and your child were to get in a car accident and you both needed, let's say your child needed treatment more than you do, you needed emergency room treatment more than you did. If you walked into the emergency room and they were operating on your child, they would remove you from that room because they need the space and they need to operate. And your presence, although you definitely love your child more than the doctors, your presence is not a resource. You're going to get in the way. It's going to be a liability. So you wait in the waiting room until there's time to visit after the child has become stabilized. Similarly, wilderness therapy, one of the things that we changed in the late 90s when we started our program was we brought parents, I'll talk more about this, we brought parents into the field. Excuse me. We brought parents into the field right away. We put parents and children on satellite cell phones in the middle of the program, not just when the child reached a certain plateau behaviorally and was cooperative. Sometimes we put them in while they're still put them on the phone while they're still struggling, because then we can do some of that therapy in real time. Then the parent leaves the field after a 2-day field visit, or the phone call ends, and then we go back to working on the parent work and the child work separately. There is plenty of research and theory that suggests that the most effective way to intervene in a system is to begin with individual sessions and individual work. That becomes the basis and the foundation for greater connection and intimacy. But when you're dealing with the heightened temperature, the pinball interaction back and forth, it's very hard for anybody to hear anything, because what happens in those moments is that the prefrontal cortex has gone offline, like Daniel Siegel talks about. When the prefrontal cortex, that part of your brain that reasons, that thinks rationally, that can anticipate and make decisions for the future, is you don't have access to it. So you pull people apart to lower the temperature, to lower the trauma response likelihood, to get some training, some coaching, some therapy, and then you bring them back together at a later point. A core idea of family systems theory, the theory that serves as the foundation for family therapy, is differentiation or individuation. Relationships are built upon individuation of each member of the family. This suggests that individual therapy, temporary separation that is, serves as a method to facilitate greater connectedness and family cohesion. Let me expand on this a little bit more and explain. I was asked years ago during one of these broadcasts. For those of you that might be new tonight, we've been doing these for just over 15 years, about 1,400 broadcasts. They go straight to our podcast app. So you're also welcome to listen to any of the more than 500 episodes to listen to Evoke Therapy's approach. Somebody asked me some years ago, they said, Brad, you're always talking about differentiation. You're always talking about healthy detachment. What about reuniting? What about connection? And I thought about that. I actually took the question at the end of one of my broadcasts, and was able to use the old therapy technique and said, that's a great question. Let's talk about it next time. And so I went about thinking about it throughout the week and thinking, I do believe in connection. I do believe in family systems. That's what my degree is. I specifically chose marriage and family therapy as a doctoral degree because I wanted to move away from the individual model. So I know I believe in it. How do I reconcile or synthesize those ideas together? And it came to me. I realized that healthy detachment, a phrase that's coined by the addiction and recovery community, healthy detachment. What's the opposite of healthy detachment? I thought, and I kind of went through a thought experiment, and what I realized was healthy detachment and healthy attachment are the same thing. Not kind of the same thing; they're the exact same thing in psychotherapeutic terms. Healthy detachment and healthy attachment mean the same thing. Prentice Hemphill used the quote that said that a healthy boundary is the distance between me and you, the distance between me and you, at which I can love you and me simultaneously. And that individuation, differentiation, sense of self, knowing who I am, is the precursor to intimacy. The first ingredient in connection and intimacy is a healthy self. Sometimes I'll finish a phone call with a parent, a coaching phone call. Their child might be at home. Maybe their child didn't never even came to Evoke's Wellness Therapy program, but I'm coaching them, and they get clear upon an idea, really crystal clear, grounded on an idea. They hang up the call, ready to move forward. And I get a call from them a day or two later saying, I got on the phone with my child and I lost it. I told the story just a couple of weeks ago about a young man who was looking forward to that phone call with his parents. But I thought he needed just a little bit of time before that would be ideal for the treatment plan. But the week came and I was ready for him to have a phone call with his parent, excited to announce to him that he was going to get his therapy phone call with his parent. That week, he happened to get a letter from his mother and she had shared that she recognized that she had a problem with alcohol, and that she herself, while he was with us, that she was going to be checking herself into a 28-day program for alcohol abuse, alcohol addiction. And I'm reading this letter with the child in session. He's reading it to me. I'm hearing this for the first time. He's overwhelmed by this news. A lot of, as you can imagine, really complex feelings. I started to feel a little bit of trepidation about the therapy phone call this week, but I said to him, you know, I did tell you you could have your phone call with your parents this week. And he said to me this. He said, not this week. He'd ask me every week for the phone call. And so he said to me, not this week. He said, if I get on the phone call with my mother, I will lose myself. Everybody listening to my voice knows what he's talking about. And that's why a program that believes in not the identified patient model, our most listened to podcast is the identified patient. We don't subscribe to that model where the child is the problem. We think the child is a symptom of a systemic issue. We believe that the child's symptoms are asking for the parents to transform, to become larger, to evolve. But every person listening to my voice knows what that young man was talking about. That sometimes in the presence of others, we succumb to what I call the gravitational pull on our sense of self, on our sovereignty of self. Sometimes when I have to make a difficult decision, I'll tell my wife, I just need a moment alone. I just need to think. I need to go inside and check in with myself. But if I look at her, or I look at my children, one of my 4 children, I can easily get lost. I can easily give myself over to them. That is why we have a temporary separation. Not because the child is the problem. In fact, if the world were a different world, I would love to have parents. That's why we started a parent program. That's why outside of Park City, Utah, we have an entire program built around adults who don't necessarily even have children that are struggling. But if they do that, they're welcome also. Come to the program, and we call it Finding You. Children need their parents to take on the responsibility of making their life their project. When I walk out to the wilderness and visit the groups, one of the first things I say to the groups of kids is, we know your parents are idiots. We know they're flawed. We know they're imperfect. We know to some extent that the reason you're here is in part because of their contribution to your life. We had our 20-year-old son, who at the time I think was 16 or 17. We had him do a 30-day program, customized program, wilderness program, a few years ago. And we were asked to write, as a part of this program, that first letter about why we wanted him to go on this trek. And I'll never forget the paragraph that my wife wrote at the top of her letter, where she said to our son, she said, it's not lost on me. It's not lost on me that you're at this program to deal with issues that you put in place in part to protect you from us as parents. I thought, what a great gift for a mother to say to a son, to offer her vulnerability, her fallibility, her humanity. And again, I would say the same thing to our clients. If I or any of our staff have hurt you, I will listen. I will validate it. I will acknowledge it. I'll give it its due. I thought this was interesting. John Bowlby, who many would consider to be the father of attachment theory, stated that boarding schools can be useful for children 8 years of age and older. He wrote this. He said, if the child is maladjusted, it may be useful for him to be away for part of the year from the tensions which produced his difficulties. And if the home is bad, or in other ways, the same is true. The boarding school has the advantage of preserving the child's all-important home ties, even if in slightly an attenuated form. And since it forms part of the ordinary social pattern of most Western communities today, the child who goes to boarding school will not feel different from other children. Moreover, by relieving the parents of the children for part of the year, it would be possible for some of them to develop more favorable attitudes toward their children during the remainder. I'll explain this to you in lay terms. The father of attachment theory, the theory that suggests that we can understand children by the way that their parents have dealt with them, by the way their parents have treated them. In essence, putting the responsibility for the child's development on the parent. Even he said that there's value in the separation. I remember studying in some of my coursework during my undergraduate that one of the difficulties with working families who have children in daycare is that when they come home at the end of the night, they want to have quote unquote quality time with their children. But because children have been in a setting where cooperation is valued, highly valued, part of quality time for an 8-year-old child might be to resist and rebel against the parents, which the parents, of course, have no energy for at the end of a workday. Virginia Satir called that moment when everybody's need conflict. She called it the witching hour. She's one of the founders of family therapy also. So separation, time out. We know, and I'm not talking about time out, giving a child a time out. I'm talking about us taking a time out. Taking some time away lowers the temperature, lowers the trauma response, helps the parent and the child, for that matter, get access to the higher levels of thinking outside of the lower parts of the brain that are emotional and that are designed to keep us away from dangerous traumatic experiences. So John Bowlby talked about separation. Alice Miller, who again puts the entire burden on the parents, said even a mother, she said, who is not especially warm-hearted can make this development possible if only she refrains from preventing it and allows the child to acquire from other people what she herself lacks. In other words, part of the gift of a parent, I remember when my son was in wilderness, I had a child that was struggling with self-harm and depression. And at one point, his parents were off on a trip that they had planned for years, literally saved for years. And they thought about coming home. They weren't going to come to the program, just coming home and being in the United States. They were on a church mission somewhere, doing medical procedures for an underdeveloped country. And they felt powerless and scared as their son struggled to adjust to the program. It was at the time that my son was in a wilderness therapy program at the same time. And I remember saying to them, I'll tell you what, I got your son. There's nothing we need from you. He's safe. You don't need to come home to the United States. I'll let you know if you do. So I got your son. And the kids that you're helping in the country, I think it was Africa. I said, the kids you're helping in Africa, you got them. And somebody's got my son. And so the idea that it takes a village to raise a child, it's happening right now, right here. When I drop my children off at practice for softball or baseball or volleyball, I don't stick around because part of what they need is to figure it out on their own. My oldest son is a junior, or excuse me, he'll be a junior in college. And the college that he goes to in New York is one that I absolutely love. Sarah Lawrence. It's actually the one that Joseph Campbell went to. And so I thought about the idea of teaching there, moving to New York and teaching there while still doing this job, maybe teaching a class or two. But we agreed as a family that I would not do that while he was in college because he needs to be away from me to find himself. I remember when my oldest was going on his church mission, not being sent away, but at 19 years old, 19, 20 years old, going away to his mission, and I was grieving just the loss that he'd be gone for 2 years. And I was talking to my therapist on a Friday with tears in my eyes saying, I'll miss him. He's my buddy. He's my firstborn child. And I hope he knows how much I love him. And my therapist said, he knows exactly how much you love him. Nothing you say in the last 3 days before he leaves will change his experience of how much you love him and the ways that you love him. And I thought, that's true. There's nothing I can say. And then she said playfully, and he needs to get as far away from you as he can. And immediately it was easy. Immediately I realized that's it. Separation sometimes is part of the context that facilitates individuation, awareness, and a sense of self. So this idea that because problems are systemically created, that we understand children and husbands and wives and brothers and sisters in the context of a system, and therefore that theory suggests that you have to treat people at the same time. There is just no evidence. There's not even any in the family systems work. There is plenty of the contrary that suggests that sometimes when it's heated and hot, when people are at risk and people are becoming reactive, that separation is the catalyst for subsequent connection. The list of parent education and parent resources we have is extensive. Parent coordinators, mentors. We have an interactive parent portal, weekly parent phone calls. These broadcasts that we do a couple of times a week live. We have parent workshops. We have parent-child phone therapy. One of the things I wanted to mention, we virtually have parents in the field, in the groups every single week. And when they come out to the field, we have some sessions and they participate in some groups, but a great deal of it is they and their children off by themselves, camping and setting up their shelter. We come and visit on them and check on them throughout the day, invite them into the group sessions. But parents and adults are present in our program virtually every week in every group. Of course, there are exceptions, but it's not something, again, it's not this secret thing that happens out there. It's this absolute invitation for parents to become involved in the process. Of course, like I mentioned, parent support groups. And then we started in 2015 our intensives program, finding you for individuals, finding family for families. We also have adventure and pursuits trips and coaching for families. So we believe, we implore, we encourage, we welcome. I think what I'm proud of at Evoke is not just that we have a robust parent curriculum and parent support system, but that we get parents into the work because it's non-shaming, the same way that we are to their children. You know, parents are just little kids with wrinkles and receding hairlines and gray hair. They deserve just as much compassion. The wounds that we carry are the wounds that get in the way of our parenting. Whenever I consult with one of our therapists, it's almost never because they're struggling with the client out in the field. Sometimes that happens, but it's usually with the parents. And I'll often just say to the therapist, if the parent were your client, how would that change how you feel about them? And immediately the therapist starts to think about it differently. Instead of thinking, oh, this parent isn't setting good boundaries or this parent is not communicating assertively, whatever the issue is that they're considering, there's an immediate shift to compassion and understanding for the parent wounds. Some other facts to share with you. Recently, this reporter from the USA Today quoted and said to me that one of the client believes that programs take money in exchange for referrals. Let me be clear to you. Evoke or its employees do not accept any compensation for referrals to programs, therapists, or consultants. This would be a violation of every single clinical license that practices therapy that I know about. In addition, Evoke offers no such compensation to any source to refer to us. So we don't get paid to refer to therapeutic boarding schools and residential treatment centers, nor do we pay anybody to send them to us. That would be a violation of our license. And I've said this before. Not only is it unethical, but it's bad business. Because if that ever were to happen and we were to be caught for it, I would not be able to practice therapy. Perhaps, at least for a little while, but perhaps forever. So not only is it unethical, it's a horrible, threatening business decision to make. If anyone has knowledge or proof of any of these violations, we request them to come forward to us or the licensing board under which we operate. We have never been presented with any evidence that this has happened. Not only would it be a violation of the sacred trust and an ethical standard, it would also be really bad business, like I mentioned. We are a wilderness program, treating adolescents suffering from mood disorders, substance use disorder, self-harm, school refusal, therapy refusal, and family conflict. The delivery method is experiential. We believe that it is the relationship with the staff and with the therapist is the catalyst, is the magic pixie dust. But also the activities tend to evoke and draw out some of the child's issues. When I talk to a parent after the child has been here for a few days and describe what we're seeing, invariably the parent will say to me or to one of our therapists, "You get them," because they can't hide, because nature exposes us. We are a small group primitive living nomadic model. We are not an adventure based model. We're not doing river rafting and rappelling. We're living in small groups, small microcosms of the family. And all of the issues that were happening at home happen with the peers in the group and with the staff who serve as temporary kind of surrogate parents in this microcosm. We are an attachment based model. Many of our therapists also utilize principles and concepts from play therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, action and commitment therapy, family systems, Jungian psychology, narrative therapy, brain spotting, somatic experience, and psychodrama. So again, the milieu is outdoors, is unplugged from social media. It's a digital detox. I've seen a lot of posts on social media over the last several years that saying being out of Wi-Fi, out of cell range is the new luxury. That connecting with nature itself is healing. The exercise that happens out there, the healthier diet, the more standard sleep routines, getting plenty of sleep, being outdoors. In fact, when we look back at the history of wilderness therapy, around the year 1900, during the flu epidemic that was happening in the United States 120 years ago, 110 years ago or so, they had to pull people out in San Francisco and in the East Coast, had to pull them out of the mental health hospitals, which back then they called asylums, and put them in tents. You can Google this if you want to. And what they found was just bringing people outdoors improved mood. Just being outside improved the mood. But it's challenging. You are living primitively. It does take work to stay dry. But the beautiful thing about that is that it teaches you the lessons that are inherent in life. I've shared many times the commercial from Derek Jeter where he talked about his parents teaching him about baseball and about teamwork and about practice. And he ends the commercial saying, "I thought they were teaching me about baseball, but they were just teaching about life." When you have adolescents or young adults or even adults for that matter who are resistant to psychotherapy, something like a wilderness therapy program can help to bypass that resistance. Oftentimes, I have students that are very therapeutically savvy, very bright. But instead of talking about the written assignments or the oral assignments, I want to talk about the bow drill fire. I want to talk about when they gave up on it. I want to talk about when they broke their bow over their knee, or when they yelled at the staff, or when they couldn't be taught, because that's where we really get into it, right? That's where the meat is. But you walk in through the front door with a lot of clients of any age, and the wall is up. But wilderness therapy, using the metaphor and the microcosm of wilderness and wilderness living, allows you to kind of go around the side, not to punch the defense right in the nose and try to break through it, but to find a non-threatening way around it. And that's what the wilderness component of our treatment program does. Our model at Evoke suggests that parents need to change as much, or in some cases even more, than the children for the best outcomes to occur and to be maintained. I will say this as clearly as I can and say it on virtually all of these broadcasts. In my experience, the 1 hour that I spend with parents will have about the same amount of worth as spending 5 hours for the child in that family. Parent therapy, parent education makes a big difference. Daniel Siegel talks about in one of my other favorite books about parenting, Parenting from the Inside Out. He makes it very clear. that the greatest contribution a parent can make to a child's well-being and mental health is for them to do their own work. I could almost just conclude with that, although I won't. We believe in parent work. We believe it's what makes the difference. And that temporary separation, like Bowlby talked about with boarding school, that temporary separation that wilderness therapy and other programs like it can provide allows parents to do their work unaffected by the daily drama and challenges of the conflict that can be often happening, or the risky behavior that's heightening the parents' fear responses. From my first book, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, I wrote, wilderness therapy teaches that it's within the context of struggling to survive that a person learns who he is, what it means to belong, and what it means to be interdependent. Within the wilderness context, one learns values. If you choose not to make a fire, you'll be cold and unable to eat a hot meal. If you aren't careful when building your shelter, you'll have an uncomfortable night of sleep. In situations like this, truths about preparation, patience, and organization are inescapable. Some of you might be familiar with Abraham Maslow's theory of hierarchy of needs. He suggested that we take care of our basic needs, safety and physical, and then we move on to belonging and eventually ego and integrity needs. Wilderness therapy believes, it is our experience, that it's in the context of that small group communal living that these lessons are best taught. In fact, I think he's still on with us tonight. Will White said some years ago, and I think it's since published this in a book, when interviewing one of the founders of wilderness therapy, he said, the person he interviewed said, whenever we adopted what we have come to call contrived experiences, that is exercises, workbooks, right? Team building challenges. Whenever we adopted what we have come to call contrived experiences, the overall impact diminished for the participants. So again, we borrow from play therapy, experiential therapy. We see that in many cases, in fact, in some research that we have done, we've found that that participants in our program attribute the greatest amount of change to the staff that are out there, not even the psychotherapist, who's the treatment team leader for every client. Parents think it's the therapist, but oftentimes the younger participants, the adolescents and young adults, attribute it to the staff that are out there, who are amazing, who go out there for 8 days, many of whom by themselves were participants in our program in the past. That it's the mentoring relationship that actually has the biggest impact on the child, more than the psychotherapy, traditionally speaking, does. We believe that there's a mindfulness that happens in the wilderness. When somebody comes to me and they're quoting the 12 steps about surrender, about letting go, about that spiritual sense of powerlessness that we often have to arrive at before we're willing to try something new, oftentimes I'll say to those folks, I don't see it. I don't see it in your wilderness experience. I hear the words, but I don't see it in the way that you're responding to the program. And we know that building grit can come from challenges. To expand further, to connect you further to the research, NASA, Harvard University, and Adam Grant. You can listen to Adam Grant's podcast from March 28th, 2018. The title of the podcast is How to Trust People You Don't Like. And on that podcast, Adam Grant, who is a famous organizational psychologist, very renowned, very well known, he talks about how astronauts on the International Space Station live in capsules together for months. And yes, they can get on each other's nerves. A crew of astronauts from different countries and the wilderness trainer who was called in for an emergency intervention share fresh insights about handling conflict and building trust. What they discovered was, if the team was struggling with trust, if the team had not worked together in prior circumstances, they would set them up in primitive living experiences outdoors, because it was only in that context that they really developed the need for healthy communication, for problem solving, for intimacy, and for trust. So if you want to learn more about it in a field that has nothing to do with wilderness therapy in this industry, but borrows from the very, very milieu, the very delivery method I've been talking about tonight, Adam Grant's podcast from March 20th, 2018, entitled How to Trust People You Don't Like, is a great resource for you. And Harvard University was a part of that also. So what are my take-homes for this evening? If you want to learn about Evoke therapy programs and our model and approach, you are welcome to peruse our website and any of our 500 podcasts and webinars. You can also look at my 2 books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, and The Audacity to Be You. What you will hear from all of that. And I would argue to say that there's never been any program that has provided as much content as Evoke Therapy programs. I think I can say that comfortably. When you look at our over 1,400, our history with over 1,400 episodes, and the podcast, which started in 2015. If you listen to it, you will hear these messages over and over again. Compassion, Buddhist-inspired non-judgment, mindfulness, family system theory, attachment theory. You can also talk to the many alumni families that will share their testimony of life-changing experiences that wilderness therapy was for their family. I want to share this with you tonight. Just tonight, an hour before this started, I had a client message us on Instagram, and I could share scores of examples like this. And I told this person I wouldn't share their name, although they told me I could. But they wrote to us privately, and they said, "I just wanted to share with you that my school wrote and released an article about my experiences at Evoke's Wilderness Therapy Program. Evoke was the best thing that I've ever experienced to help me develop and grow." Over and over again, that is the feedback that we get from families and individuals. And like I said, we believe at Evoke that safety is not the precursor to treatment. Safety is the treatment. And although that might seem obvious to you folks, I spend my life, not just at Evoke, but all over the world in all kinds of settings, trying to train and teach therapists that same thing. Our goal, my goal, is to improve psychotherapy practices in all contexts. And going back to that earlier slide where they said that there were no safe programs, if safe is measured by perfection, they are absolutely clearly right. But if safe is measured by people that are trying to use evidence-based practices to pull out, to evoke from the client and the family the healing that is inside of them, then we think that there are many safe programs. If you want to read more about my journal article where I talk about this, the name of the article is Psychology versus Therapy. You can Google Psychology versus Therapy, or look at the link there. Psychology versus Therapy, and look at Brad Reedy and Michelle Reedy. It was co-authored by myself and my wife, Michelle. And also, at the end of each podcast, these are the resources that I share. I'll take any live questions or comments on our next broadcast, because we do a Q&A for family and friends and siblings every other broadcast. On February 1st, we have a multi-couples intensive. This is our first intensive for multi-couples. It'll be a family of origin focus. If you want to do healing side by side, shoulder to shoulder with your spouse, this is probably not a good therapy intensive if it's high conflict, or if you don't feel safe enough to do your work with your partner. But February 1st is that offering. I'll be running that one. On February 24th, I'll be hosting the Conscious Parenting Workshop. This is our third iteration of this workshop, from 9:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. I look forward to that. And then I'll be teaching a masterclass on attachment-based therapy, and I'll get that out, that date out soon. You can also read The Journey of the Heroic Parent or The Audacity to Be You, available on Amazon or Audible. If you want to do a deep dive into your own work, the January program is full, but the next offering for Finding You is February 22nd through 26th. And like I said, the greatest predictor that we have any control over of a child's mental health and well-being is how well the parent has come to understand their own childhood. The parent work is essential, is critical, is foundational and fundamental to this process. So if you want to do that work, if you're just beginning, Finding You is a fantastic springboard into your work. If you're doing your work, it's also a great, what I call, therapy accelerator. We also have an online offering. January 27th is our next offering. It's half the time and about a third of the cost, and also doesn't require travel. We started it during COVID, and we found it to be much more effective than we ever imagined. So we're continuing to do it long after COVID, long after the restrictions have lifted. Contact intensives at evoketherapy.com for more information. We have support groups every week. We've been doing this for 10 years now. We have support groups every week. Now we do them online December 22nd is the next offering at 6:30 p.m. We have once a month an alumni only meeting. December 27th at 6:30 p.m. is the next offering for alumni only, and then we have one a month for our intensives alumni. January 10th is the next offering. Contact Malia at evoketherapy.com for more information. If you want to coach for individual work, couples work, family work, parent work, we have attachment based trained coaches. Contact coaching at evoketherapy.com for more information or to get a coach there. We also have pursuit trips for young adults and families. We ask all families. This is something we've been saying for years. We ask all families to attend 6 of any combination of these following 12-step groups: Al-Anon.org, CODA.org, FamiliesAnonymous.org, or AdultChildren.org. You can also go to RefugeRecovery.org or NAMI.org for free classes and resources in your area. All these broadcasts are available on Spotify or your favorite podcast app. We release them the next day after they're recorded live here. Just go to your favorite podcast app and search Finding You an Evoke Therapy Podcast, or you can go to soundcloud.com and listen to it there on your computer by searching the same thing. You can also go to our YouTube channel and you can watch the video presentations with the slides in the background there. You can find Evoke Therapy programs and me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on Twitter and Instagram using the handles at Evoke Therapy and at Dr. Brad Reedy. You can also find Evoke Intensives on Instagram using the handle at Evoke Therapy and Intensives. You can find us on Facebook by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And also we have a blog curated and developed by Malia, who does a wonderful job of it each week with new content from our staff and therapists. If you want to give back to people that can't afford therapy, our 3 charitable partners include ChooseMentalHealth.org, Sky'sTheLimitFund.org, and EvokeFamilyFoundation.org. My next broadcast, I'm going to be off through the holidays now. My next broadcast will be January 3rd at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. By the way, you're all invited. It's a question and answer for Evoke family and friends. That includes siblings. So it gives you a chance to have, if people are worried, if they're curious, if they just don't have any idea what you're doing, you can invite and share the link with them to attend the live forum, and they're welcome to attend and ask questions. You can also ask questions to me that they've asked of you. So that the content for that broadcast is generated by you, the listening audience. So, all right, folks, thanks for joining me. I hope this was helpful in responding. I hope I did an adequate job of responding compassionately, at the same time being clear about what we represent. As I always say at the end of these, for and on behalf of the people that love you and that you love, thank you for being willing to do your work and look at yourself. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you next time, folks. Take care. Bye-bye.